With Rings of Power Season 2 premiering just last week, the internet has been on fire with debates about the show. Attacks on all sides about lore, storytelling, dialogue, and so much more. But I want to take a different approach. I want to zoom out and look at this from a broader perspective. See, the fundamental problem with Rings of Power isn't Galadriel in armor, Old Man Celebrimbor, or baby orcs. It's Amazon. Adaptations from literature to film are famously complicated. It's nearly impossible to convert hundreds and thousands of words from an entirely different medium onto the big screen and then deliver that to an already existing fan base of lifelong readers who have already imagined this story on their own for years. I've written scripts and manuscripts, and I've always loved both. So when it comes to this strange negotiation, I sympathize with both sides. But I think it's safe to say that Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings are some of the best movie-to-film adaptations of all time. Jackson found a way to bring the energy, the very spirit of the text to every minute of those films. You feel immersed not only in the world of Tolkien, but the words themselves come alive. So when I heard that Amazon had acquired the rights to the appendices of the Lord of the Rings books, I was worried. And with Rings of Power in its second season, I think my worst fears have been confirmed. Now, before anyone accuses me of simply being too stubborn, uninterested in anything that isn't a recreation of the Jackson trilogy, does anyone remember the Hobbit movie? Not that Hobbit movie, but the animated Hobbit movie, you know, the Rankin Bass one. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was creative and different. It had a voice and a character of its own while also doing its best to bring the text to life. And what about the almost Hobbit movies? Many people don't know this, but right up until production, the Hobbit trilogy was supposed to be 2 movies, directed by none other than the legendary Guillermo del Toro, the creative mind behind works like Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy, and even a stop-motion version of Pinocchio. Now that would have been incredible to witness. See, I'm not interested in recreating nostalgia or regurgitating genius. There's a time for everything. And I understand that the only feat more difficult than adapting a book to screen is trying to do it again. But they couldn't figure it out, so they brought in Jackson at the last minute to try and create another trilogy from a book a quarter of the size. And we got this. But my point is, I have no problem with originality. I think that adapting a work as vast as Lord of the Rings is a complicated ordeal, and I understand that we, the audience, are going to have a wide array of varying perspectives. Which brings me to Amazon's Rings of Power. See, my fundamental problem, my fundamental question about this show is, who is its target audience? Its creators claimed that this was a new world, a new timeline, a new but loyal take on Middle-earth, but that doesn't seem to line up with the evidence. Amazon spent $250 million to acquire the rights to Rings of Power. It's only 189 pages of content, so theoretically, that steep of a price is for more than just the content, it's for the privilege of the intellectual property, the automatic audience that comes with it. And that's where things start to unravel. When watching Rings of Power, it's very clear they were inspired by the works of Tolkien, but more than that, they were inspired by Peter Jackson's take on Tolkien. The swords, the armor, the cultural aesthetics all seem to mirror the Lord of the Rings trilogy. For example, the design of Sauron, which was based off of Tolkien's descriptions of Morgoth, while not identical to the Jackson films, is certainly heavily inspired by them. The Iron Crown, the black armor, it's meant to evoke the same imagery and emotion that we have toward the previous iteration. And the same can be said about many of the other aspects of the show. I mean, the Harfoots are just there to fulfill the Hobbit requirement, down to the fact that Nori is simply just a cut-and-paste female Frodo. And that's to say nothing of the cinematography or the repurposed dialogue. These aren't huge issues by themselves, but when you combine them, they form a show that is too afraid to grow up, to be independently creative, instead of riding on the coattails of what has come before, and frankly, doing it badly. And that's the issue with the show overall. Right? It claims to be independent and original when it benefits them, but is still vaguely drawn to recreating many of the aesthetics of the Jackson trilogy with a few key differences. The writing consistently falls into a common creative trap, being plot-driven rather than character-driven. The plot points are based on what needs to happen next rather than following naturally from characters' desires, fears, and consequent decisions. The result is forced. A story in which characters are merely moving around, moving the plot ever forward without believable motivations, without being themselves fully fledged, complex, relatable people. The characters, and therefore the audience, are bent to the will of the creator. And in light of such a complex story about corruption and seduction and the epic battle of good and evil, that's a fundamental failure that can't be allowed to happen. Something else I've noticed is the themes themselves. The creators of the show are clearly setting out to write a more morally nuanced story, something that could bridge the gaps between productions like Game of Thrones and The Lord of the Rings. It's a move I completely understand. Writing has changed a lot since the professor's time, and audiences are drawn now more than ever to complex character-based narratives. But because the writers failed to establish a clear moral good and evil, such ambiguity seems lazy and out of place in this universe. Let's take a look at the orcs, for example. While there are several explanations for their origin, the most commonly accepted one is that orcs were once elves, corrupted long ago by the dark powers of the sorcerer Morgoth, and now reduced to savage beasts of war. And this fits directly in line with the themes of corruption, of the power of good and evil, which run through Lord of the Rings. So, to have a moment of attempted normalcy to convey empathy by showing an orc husband and his orc wife and child as if he drives home in his orc car to his orc neighborhood in his orc cul-de-sac every day seems a bit obtuse, as if the creators either are unaware of the narrative themes or are actively ignoring them. I'm fascinated by a story of deception and corruption. But without an understanding of what is being lost, right? Something more than just some establishing shots or some expositional dialogue about the current social status quo, without an understanding of the true moral grounding of Middle-earth, why would I be invested in its slow and inevitable destruction? It's why the slow burn opening of the Fellowship of the Ring or the scenes in Rivendell are so crucial. I want to revel in the goodness, not just to sense its existence, but feel it. Now, I think it's easy to lob, generalized criticisms about the show, saying that this take is just too modern, right? That it's been infected by the current culture and its associated ideologies. But I want to avoid this claim for the sake of intellectual honesty. Sure, it does feel a bit empty and modern, but there's a reason for that. The thought patterns of the characters, the way they approach solutions to their problems revealed by the language they used, betrays a therapized worldview particular to the 21st century. It takes a viewer out of the story and draws awareness to the already daunting task of matching Tolkien's prose. This effect is only exacerbated by the inconsistent quality of armor and clothing, as well as the racial casting. It's not the fact of having minority actors in the show. It's the fact that every city has a perfect distribution of human races. Perfect racial variety is unique to modernity, enabled by our unprecedented physical and online connectivity, by our ability to communicate on a worldwide level. In a narrative which takes huge inspiration from the ancient world, from poems and epics, this just rings untrue. Humanity, for most of its history, has been tribalistic. And even in the instances where we had the moral maturity to show equal respect for other nations and tribes, there simply wasn't the opportunity to do so. The ability for several different races to congregate in one area simply didn't exist. Travel was difficult, expensive, and dangerous. So if you were born in a certain country, you generally stayed there. Ignoring that fact makes the whole narrative feel artificial and contrived. Rings of Power is a corporate clone, with all the dressings, all the marketing, all the flash of the books and films, but without any of the substance. It's synthetic. It lacks the lifeblood of creative vision. And because of that, the Rings of Power can never truly succeed. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the whole issue, on the show itself. What do you guys think of Season 2? Is it better or worse than Season 1? As always, feel free to kind of jump in the comments down below. What other topics do you guys want me to make some videos about? And even if you've taken a special and unique affinity to blacksmithing, large spiky helmets, and world domination, don't forget, keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you all in the next video.